And Christy, if you don't mind just taking the mic and introducing yourself, and then we'll do some Q&A after your presentation.
Sounds good. Um, Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Johnson. I am looking forward to sharing something with you that I've just kind of been working on after many, many different conversations in different contexts. And this is version 2 of this kind of framework. So I'm very excited for your feedback because it definitely, I think, can be improved. So I'll look forward to folks' feedback afterwards. But just to give you a little bit of context about where I'm coming from. So I am a partner at Fire Road Ventures. We are an early stage investing firm. We work with technology broadly, but we're specifically interested in companies that are building to solve critical problems for service sectors and SMBs. We've made 18 investments to date from coast to coast, and tend to enter these opportunities when they are like very small, usually in the first 18 months of operation, oftentimes pre-revenue, all the time pre-scale, maybe two co-founders, maybe a couple of developers or engineers working on the product, but very, very early companies. And before that, I managed an accelerator that's based here in Cincinnati called Ocean. And so I've just worked with a lot of people doing a lot of cool stuff, and have had a couple moments like this. And I don't know if a spread like this is familiar to you, but I was out to dinner one night with a friend who is also a founder who was walking me through, I kid you not, a list of 30 different priorities on their phone that they were trying to decide what should we do first to tell if our startup is going to go anywhere. And these were based on different stakeholders, different potential customers, different kind of product ideas. And as I'm sitting there listening to my friend who, as I reflect on it, was probably just looking for somewhere to verbally process everything that was going on internally. But it was like, man, I don't think you should care what I think about any of this. Like, my feedback here is not what you need. I'm happy to listen and ask you some clarifying questions, but you probably need input from somewhere else. Now, the reality is we find ourselves in those situations on both sides of the table pretty frequently. And another example that's probably will come right to mind is around the dinner table, maybe with extended family or family friends at a holiday, and you're telling them what you're working on, and they say, "Oh, have you ever thought of A, B, or C?" It's like, well, let me tell you why A, B, and C actually is irrelevant to everything that I just told you, Aunt Donna, but thank you for your feedback. And we get all of these conversations where we get feedback from people that may or may not know what they're talking about things that may or may not be relevant. And we want to be open, and we want to learn, and we want to have open minds and be flexible and coachable. But it's unavoidable that we'll get to decisions in our work, in our careers, in our household, where we need to ask ourselves these two questions. Should this matter to me? I was on a raising our first fund about 2 years ago and had a call with somebody who managed like a big state fund, and just had like the call was terrible. It was awful. I hung up and put my head between my knees and like cried for 30 seconds, and then sat up and was like, wait, should I even care what that person thinks? What do I do with that? And then on the other side, we have situations where we're just getting so much input. Everything seems like potentially important, potentially actionable, but how do we get one step closer to knowing what to do? So, in especially in environments like where I spend most of my time with startups, where we're dealing with high ambiguity and very little history of what works and what doesn't. How do we get closer to clarity? So what I've been working on is not like a silver bullet. It's not a you know, one answer. This is going to solve all your problems, but hopefully a framework that can help you at least like locate an input and decide if it should matter to you or not. And I am thinking along the lines of two different categories. The first being relevance and the second being trust. So let's just look for a second at trust here. When I'm taking in feedback from somebody, and this is designed to be like really general again. So it's like, what kind of a career should I move into? Hopefully this will be helpful to you. Should I start this business? Hopefully this will be helpful. Should I think about tweaking our product in these different ways? Hopefully this framework will be general enough and helpful enough for you in filtering some feedback you're getting. So starting with trust, the three kind of subcategories that I think about here is my source coming from a place where we have aligned vision and values? Are we thinking about the same desired outcome? Do we have a shared sense of what is real and what is good? Because if that's true, I'm probably going to prioritize their feedback more than somebody who might have a totally different end goal. This comes up a lot actually in my day-to-day work in venture capital, right? I, as an investor, have a specific business model that depends on a specific growth trajectory from our investments and a certain time frame for liquidity. That's what my business model is. That may not always be in the best interest of a founder I'm talking to. So, a founder who's starting a handmade soap company, Elizabeth, like you're working on, you probably shouldn't listen to that much of my advice related to financing your business because I'm operating in a very different model and looking for very different outcomes. So that's one category. The second is frequency. And this just takes over time. Like, am I hearing the same thing from different sources? And maybe that's as simple as 100 different people in a UX survey giving me the same feedback. And maybe it's the same thing as my best friend and my spouse and my mom are all saying it really seems like it's time for you to make a career change. So frequency is the second category there. And then the third is relationship. And this just comes down to, can I trust this source because I personally know them and have a history of working with them, of being aligned with them. I understand their background and their context, and so I can depend on this input to be helpful and be relevant. So then the second kind of sphere that I want to think about when I'm placing feedback is on this relevance scale. So what we're building is actually like a grid. We're going to go 3 by 3 with trust and relevance. When we think about the relevance of some feedback, again, going back to the dinner table at Thanksgiving, like Aunt Donna doesn't know what she's talking about when she is talking to me about venture capital. And that's fine because I look at this and I say, like, well, it's not really relevant. Does Aunt Donna have the expertise that I need at this moment in time? No, she's never worked in this industry. She hasn't developed any of these skills. Does she have experience? Not really. Maybe she's made some investing decisions herself with her 401k, but she hasn't built an experience in the industry. So we're looking for feedback from places where the person or the source has demonstrated a knowledge set that's been built up over time in similar situations. And then kind of finally this relevance theme and sorry, the responsibility theme. Am I responsible to the person who's giving me this feedback? And a lot of times that comes up in a contractual or a fiduciary relationship. And going back again to just my day to day. So if I'm talking with a portfolio company in whom we've already invested, my expectation is that our firm's feedback carries significantly more weight than somebody who hasn't invested. Similarly, if I'm talking to a company we haven't invested in, or a company that's outside of our area of expertise, and they're saying, well, should we, make these decisions with partnerships, or we're not sure which direction to go with our target market, we're pretty quick to say, hey, like we can offer some feedback, but this is not our area of expertise. So you should really take it with a grain of salt. And that kind of builds for us our second axis, so to speak, on this map of filtering feedback. So what we end up with is this kind of 9x9 to hopefully help you take a theme of feedback or input that you're hearing and place it in one of these kind of 9 boxes. So let's take, for example, the terrible meeting I had with the state fund manager. Now, in that situation, there's pretty high relevance. It matters to me what he thinks because he invests in fund managers like me professionally. However, he hasn't invested in me personally. And I'm not sure that we have the same view of the world and what our desired goal is for investing. So I probably would put him kind of right in the middle there. He's fairly relevant and has some meaningful experience and expertise, but I'm not ready to take his word 100% and bend over backwards to make this specific person happy. So along the middle kind of diagonal axis there, you see the yellow magnifying glasses. And when we would put something in a category in one of these boxes, the idea is let's locate it there and then let's validate that feedback. Let's either get more input. Let's either check that feedback with somebody who has better expertise, or let's check that feedback with somebody who knows me better and with whom I have higher trust and a more established relationship. If we're getting feedback from somebody in that very top right corner, high relevance, high trust, we can confidently say like, I'm going to go for it. Whatever that input is recommending I do, I'm going to be able to take action there confidently. Or on the opposite corner in the bottom left, where we have very low relevance, very low trust, random person on LinkedIn saying something that may or may not have been written with AI. I don't need to pay attention to that. Be free of that feedback. Not everything matters. And the idea is as we keep getting more feedback, we can either move along the relevance axis, look for similar or conflicting feedback from people and sources who have a more relevant perspective, or move up on the y-axis and look for conflicting or similar input from people or sources with whom we have more established trust. Now, what I've realized, and this is where I welcome maybe some interaction, is that sometimes we need to challenge our biases, and sometimes we need input that will help us have a fresh perspective or turn our view of the world a little bit on its head so that we can think more creatively, get outside of our status quo. And in those cases, what I've realized is that, sometimes it is helpful to take a problem around partnership discussions or around even career advice and what's the next move to go talk to somebody who's operated in a very different context. So like, what do you think about this? Have you ever experienced some of these particular questions, maybe in a very different environment and maybe in a very different stage. But sometimes getting that fresh perspective can be helpful. And that I think is important to call out, because otherwise we can just be looking for an echo chamber. If we're always looking for feedback from people we already know who have had all the same experiences as us, like that's not what I'm trying to articulate here. But what I am trying to say is, like, these are some helpful things to think through when you're getting feedback from somebody. And then once you've kind of like decided, oh, this input, this feedback is important to me, it's not necessarily always urgent and doesn't immediately demand action. So these are a couple of just frameworks, or, you know, grids to think about in terms of prioritizing action. So once you've kind of decided this feedback is helpful, it's important, I should do something about it. Now you need to decide, how urgently do I need to do something about it? So a couple of things that are helpful for me in deciding urgency. I think about work in three buckets. I think about now, next, and later. Is this something I need to do or change now? Is it next, or is it later? It's low priority. I'll get to it eventually. Or on the right of this slide, we have the Eisenhower matrix, which the 4 box is related to urgency and importance, which can kind of just help you say, like, oh, this is non-urgent but it's important. So let's get that on the schedule to deal with it. So those are just a couple of like next steps, but maybe for the purposes of the rest of our time, I'll just keep this up and take a peek at the Q&A here for the rest of our time.
Christy,
Curious.
thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome presentation. This is super helpful. There are a couple of questions in the chat, and I would invite everybody to throw a question in the chat if you've got it. We can kind of go through that as our cue. I think the first one came in from Justin. It says, do you think people tend to give better feedback when you ask for it, or does it work better when it's unprompted?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really depends on the situation, right? I think in so in moments when there's a very explicit decision to be made, let's say for me, one of the decisions I make regularly is my team, is my fund interested in investing in this company? So we make that decision, many times a week. And when we ask for feedback, what's the most important for us to do is to frame that ask in terms of what specifically we're trying to learn, versus just sending an opportunity to one of our advisors or somebody we know who works in the same industry. Sometimes you might just send it to them and say, like, what do you think? Versus sending it to them and say, I'm trying to validate, that this is a real problem for these buyers. What do you think? And we get much better feedback when we give some guide rails to people that way. I think people who offer their opinions unsolicited should, I mean, personally, I tend to take that with a grain of salt. And I find one of the most helpful motions personally is, if I find myself offering feedback unsolicited, what I tend to check in with somebody is to ask, what kind of a conversation is most helpful for you right now? Do you want my opinion as a advisor, as a friend, professionally? What kind of a conversation do you want? And then tend to be responsive that way is how I try to address that personally. Try not to walk around offering opinions unsolicited, but it abounds. So that is definitely real.
Another question I threw in the chat was around how to objectively judge on this matrix versus just kind of we preach the mom test book in our
Mhm.
group, and it's very easy to get soft and nice feedback, but how do you judge it objectively and make sure that you're not going astray on that front?
Um, so first thing I would say is like this is not like science or like quantitative. It's just kind of an effort to offer some directional, you know, a mindset for when you get feedback. On that, I would say I always would recommend looking for multiple sources. And in that case, again, that's probably where you want to tip it and start looking for sources that are not friendly. Start looking for input from people who haven't been on the sidelines watching you work and watching you think about something, watching you create for weeks, months, years, and get fresh perspective for sure. I don't think it's, I would lean towards quantity. I'm seeing your question here. Is it just about getting a larger number of people to provide feedback? I certainly think that helps. Yeah.
Alan put in a question, I think a question here. Alan, do you want to come off mute and add any context to your question? Oh,
Sorry about that. Yeah, I find that, it depends on what side of the bed I'm getting up on each morning to be able to have myself in a happy, positive response. And if I look up at the exit of my bedroom door where I have a sign that says, I get to do this as an opportunity of a positive nature, or do I wake up and go, where's my coffee? And then I go into a meeting. Halfway through the meeting, I find I'm not listening properly, and I'm just wondering then, as an investor, do you all discuss that kind of talking to people uh, to be able to say, well, we need to look at it openly and see what the market is, because your company is new, is what you're telling me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so do you have like R&D besides just technology and other aspects that you are looking for, or is it all just an open buffet?
I, so my perspective there has really shifted in the last 2 years. So when we started, we were very open and had a really generalist kind of view on what we wanted to invest in. And I think over time, we've developed specific areas where we're interested, where we are seeing either a lot of activity. So then you can kind of have a more well-rounded view of what people are working on and what solutions are out there. But then we also have seen gaps. So, for example, I'll give you an example in both of those scenarios. So when we started our fund, we were generally early stage technology. One of the things we started seeing very, very quickly is AI agents that build software. And Taylor, you've probably seen a lot of these too. Um, First time we saw it, we were like, wow, this is cool. Wow, like we're not gonna need we're not gonna need engineers anymore. Nobody's gonna be actually building software anymore. It's just gonna be agents talking to agents, and it's gonna be so cool. Well, 18 months later, we're like, oh, okay, not quite as novel as it struck us initially. And we've also decided, this is a space where we don't really have a perspective on what makes a winner. We don't have any real right to be overly helpful to founders working in these types of businesses. So we're going to respectfully pass on getting involved there. But it took us a long time to develop that perspective. Similarly, I'm thinking, okay, well, and the other part of this is we got more refined on our thesis and more refined on our, the areas where we're interested. So that's where we kind of fall back on our right to have a perspective with the founder, on our right to actually offer feedback and to give them direction is based on the areas where we're willing to roll up our sleeves and put our money where our mouth is and invest. So another one of these is in thinking about AI everywhere and kind of like for me personally, what are the things that I think it matters that people are in the loop doing work of such a kind. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is like creativity, human creativity and expression and art and beauty. And like, there's a lot we can do with technology now that used to all have to be done by hand or with a cursor, and it's way easier now. But for me, I want to see humans involved in creative work. So how can I go out and find a company that's doing that work? So I'm bringing that perspective, having done some research in the market, having looked at some alternatives, and being able to say like, okay, no, I do have a perspective on this. This is kind of what we're looking for. But both of those, the easier way to a no and an easier way to a yes, came over time, not right out the gate.
Yeah, it
So
sounds like
I guess like
you're,
we don't go in with neutrality, but try to be respectful either way. Yeah.
and it sounds like what you've been doing is over time, the time has been helpful for both of these axes that you have on the chart here. Like that additional work you're putting in increases both trust and relevance of any feedback that you would be giving.
Mm-hmm.
That's helpful. So typically we'll stop this at quarter to the hour. I've got one maybe last question for you on the feedback side, but this has been awesome. Thank you, Christy. If you could make suggestions to the group on how to elicit helpful feedback. Are there specific ways to ask for that or approaches that will allow the person you're seeking feedback from not to pull any punches or hold back from providing negative feedback or feel bad?
Yeah, I think one of the things that helps people be at ease is if you start a conversation by saying, I've been, re- I've been trying to work on this, or I've been noticing this in if you were a product owner, I've been noticing this in our product and I really wish it were better. Could you tell me what your experience has been? Or, start by saying like recognizing that you are asking for their perspective because you want to improve. Um, would be the place I would start with that conversation. And then ask a next question or like listen for the first answer and then say like, oh, tell me more about that. Or especially, I also find people use like pronouns and oh shoot, they'll talk about it or this. And it's like, what do you mean when you say this? Or I just want to make sure I'm tracking with what you're saying. When you say it's frustrating, do you mean the login flow is frustrating? Or do you mean when you get to your home screen, it's frustrating? You know, asking like drill down questions will, I think, help people feel more comfortable, like being more precise with their feedback and feeling like you are very open to it, and that's also like hard to do interpersonally, if you're talking to a coworker, or if you're a supervisor and are working with somebody on your team and asking, what can I do to be a better boss? That's probably not going to get you a lot of great feedback. But if you say, I've really been trying to help our team feel comfortable sharing their opinions in meetings more. Could you help me understand what it's like for you in our meeting when I ask for feedback? And then walk through a scenario and an example with
Yeah, that,
questions instead of like generalities.
yeah, that's really helpful. I think that what you're describing in terms of the specificity and just the curiosity of the person requesting feedback is super helpful. Thank you again for fielding all these questions and this presentation. Super helpful. I really like this matrix. If people have additional questions or would like to reach out to you, is there a better way than others? Is LinkedIn good, or
Yeah,
what would
LinkedIn
you
is great.
suggest? Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate you spending time with us today and sharing your knowledge about this. Thanks everybody for attending. Great to see you all. We'll be back here next Tuesday and looking forward to seeing you all again. Thanks,
Thanks,
Christy.
everyone.
Really appreciate it.
Mhm. Yeah.